I'm Leah, the creator behind Charlie Darwin Textiles, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to use my special height adjustment calculator so that you can make your sewing patterns fit you even more perfectly no matter your height. As someone who's 5 foot 1 inches tall and also sewn hundreds of custom sized garments for other people, I know that a simple height adjustment can really make a huge difference in the fit and comfort of handmade garments. When it comes to sewing your own clothes, there's no standardization, unfortunately, to the sizing between different sewing pattern makers. But all the patterns I make with Charlie Darwin are designed for a body height of about 5 foot 4 inches or 162.5 centimeters. And if you're any taller or shorter than this and you don't make adjustments to the sewing pattern, you might find that the proportions of your final garment look a little bit off. So for instance, like without making any adjustments, you could end up with an awkwardly placed waistline or sleeve or pant leg hems that are too long or too short for you. Even if you know you want to adjust your patterns by body height, you probably have no idea how much to adjust it by. Well, I'm happy to say I have really cracked the code and made it so there's no more guessing about how much length to add or subtract to your sewing patterns. I've created a really simple height adjustment calculator that totally takes the guesswork out of modifying your patterns. You can find it over on my website at charliedarwintextiles.com/calculator. Okay, so let me just show you how it works. All right, so once you've landed on the Charlie Darwin Textiles website, you just want to navigate to the height adjustment calculator, which I have in this tab currently. Again, this exact page can be found at charliedarwintextiles.com/calculator. So all we're going to do is we're going to first choose between whether we want our measurement in inches or centimeters. I'm in the United States, so I'm going with inches. That's what is the norm to me. And I am going to put in two different numbers here. So the first number I'm going to put in is the body height that the sewing pattern is designed for. So for Charlie Darwin sewing patterns, the height is designed for someone who's 64 inches tall, but this might be different if you're working with someone else's sewing patterns. So like you might have a sewing pattern by a different maker and you know that theirs is perfect for a 67-inch tall person. I'm going to stick with 64 for now because that's Charlie Darwin's measurements. And then the second number I'm going to put in here is my total body height in inches. I'm personally 61 inches, which is 5 foot 1 inches tall, but don't do feet and inches, just do inches. So that is 5 foot 1 inches is equivalent to 61 inches. And then there's no submit button or anything. You can either press enter on your keyboard or just click the blank space below. And it'll auto-populate the three different adjustments that you're going to make to your different pattern pieces. So I can see here on my bodice piece, you can hover over these little infographics. It tells you that you're going to add or subtract this length at the waistline of the shirt. So my bodice piece says 0.94 inches, and you can go ahead and round to the nearest, I usually do the nearest 0.25 inches. So for my bodice piece, I'd probably make an adjustment of 1 inch. Now, use your common sense here. If you are shorter, like me, I'm shorter, 61 inches compared to 64, I want to subtract 1 inch from my bodice piece. If you're taller, then of course you want to be adding this length to your different pieces. So I know here on my sleeve, I'm going to add or subtract this length at the wrist of my sleeve. I would probably round this to 1.25 inches. And for long pants or a skirt, I would probably round this up to 1.5 inches that I would need to subtract from the length. Let me give you an example real quick of patterns still made for someone at 64 inches, but let's say you are 69 inches tall. That means you're 5 foot 9 inches tall. You can see that the amount that you're going to adjust these patterns by is going to vary. So now let's say you're 69 inches tall, but you're using a totally different pattern maker than me, And this pattern maker customizes all their patterns for someone who is 68 inches tall. You can see that that adjustment is going to be much smaller. Now, as far as things like the sleeve or long pants slash skirt, that they can have some different variations. So like you might have short sleeve versus long sleeve. This measurement here is for long sleeves for your full arm length to your wrist. So if you were going to do a short sleeve shirt, I would say from my judgment, a short sleeve is about 1/3 the length of a long sleeve. So I would take my sleeve measurement adjustment and just divide it by 3. And I'd say shorts again are probably about 1/3 of my total long pant length. So I would take this, divide it by 3. Something that was more like knee length, I would probably divide this by 2. Now let's talk about how to actually adjust your sewing pattern using the measurements from the calculator. You want to start by identifying the areas on your pattern where the adjustment needs to be made. In general, for pretty much every pattern piece, we will be always adding or subtracting the length from the bottom of a pattern piece while retaining the final width of the bottom hem. So for a bodice, you'll add or subtract length from the bottom of the piece without altering the bottom hem width. You can do this on paper first or do it at the stage of when you're tracing the pattern onto the fabric. That's when I usually do it. Today I'm just going to do it on paper to make it easier to see. But let's say I'm making this garment for someone who is 70 inches tall. The calculator told me to add about 1.75 inches to the bodice. So I'll trace out the entire top portion of the bodice pattern piece. Marking the center front and where the armhole meets the side seam. Now I'm using a quilter's ruler here, but you could use any type of standard ruler. I'm just going to measure 1.75 inches down from my bottom hemline. This is a straight hemline, so it's pretty simple to just add a straight line 1.75 inches down below. I'll show you how to do a curve a little bit later. But for now, I'm just adding a line, that distance below that the calculator instructed me to for my bodice piece only. And now I want to make sure that I shift my bodice piece straight down. Anytime you move your pattern piece up or down, you just want to make sure that it's staying very parallel and exact with the grain line or the arrows on your sewing pattern. So I'm keeping that center line very even, and I'm also lining up that straight line onto the new line that I drew at the bottom. And I'm going to just extend my center down. That one's easy enough. And I'm going to keep that bottom hem width. So I'm marking where the waistline side seam is. I'm adding a star just so you can see it better. And now I just need to connect from my underarm side seam to my waist side seam. So I'm just going to use a straight edge to connect the two dots. On this bodice, again, it's a straight line. Sometimes you'll have a curved line. I'll show that in just a second. Before that, let me just quickly show you how I would alternatively shorten the pattern if I was going to shorten it 1 inch. So I do the same method of outlining the top and my center. Now I would also probably do my bottom hemline just to give myself a baseline, move that pattern out of the way, and give myself a new line 1 inch above that. Now I'm going to line up my center line and my bottom hemline with the old pattern and make a mark where the bottom waist side seam is. And now I'm just going to connect that up with my underarm side seam. Now for a bodice piece that has curved edges, like this one has a curved side seam and a curved bottom hem, we're going to go through the exact same steps. So I'm just going to trace out my top portion of my sewing pattern and then do my long straight center front seam. And I've also marked the spot where my underarm side seam is going to start heading down towards the bottom hem. Now what I need to do is just lower that bottom hem by 1.75 inches while still keeping its shape and the total width of that line. So I'm going to move straight down from my center front because I know that's going to, keep everything very squared up on my pattern. I'm marking 1.75 inches down. Then I'll go ahead and just slide my pattern down that straight line, keeping it lined up on the center there. I like to use pattern weights to keep everything in place as I draw around. And then I'm just going to trace that final bottom hem. And what's really important here is we've kept the bottom hem the exact same shape and width. And I've marked that waist side seam point that we now need to connect up with our underarm point. So to get this curve right, what you'll see is that my original pattern is, of course, shorter than what we need here. So what I like to do is sort of center it between my 2 points there that we're filling in. And I want to keep sort of the same waist width there. So I'm just going to mark how skinny and narrow, this shirt is going to be. And then use my pattern to sort of bridge my curves in between there. Now you can see the original pattern lined up with my new pattern. We've dropped the waist down, kept the exact same shape and width. Now I'll show you real quick an example of a bodice piece that is a little bit more irregular shaped. This one has a V neckline, and so what I'm going to do is I'm still going to draw out the top portion, including the underarm and the dart on this bodice piece, and I'll show you right there is where actually my underarm side seam point is. So I'm going to stop right there. Now this bodice has a little bit of a curve to it on the bottom edge, but I'm going to, at least from sort of the straight points or from the center, I'm going to measure down my 1.75 inches, just at least a portion of it, so I can see how far down I want to draw that line. And because we have no straight center front line that is going to run parallel with the grain line, because we have that V-neck, I'm instead going to use the arrow on my sewing pattern to help me keep my pattern aligned up and down. I'm just going to mark a notch basically on the sewing pattern, and then down on my line, that's my drop down 1.75 inch. This is going to make sure that when I slide it down, I can still line up my lines right there and ensure that my pattern is pointing directly up. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark my new center front and my waist side seam corner there, and draw out my new bottom hemline on my bodice. And you can see that I'm still retaining the exact width and shape of this bodice because, for example, this bodice is going to connect with a skirt, and that skirt hemline hasn't changed, so I need it to stay exactly the same. So now what I need to do is just connect my inner shoulder point there with my center front of that V-neck, and you can see that this line is going to be at a little bit of a different angle because we've moved down, and I'm also going to fill in my side seam line. Both are straight lines, so I've just used a straight edge to get us there. And you can see, compared to my original pattern, we keep that width of the bottom hem and just drop it down.
All right, now let's do a sleeve. So I'm doing a long sleeve, and it's a very similar concept to the bodice. I'm going to trace out the top portion of my sleeve to my underarm point. And then I'm going to draw the center line, the midline, all the way down my sleeve length. Now I'm going to be making this sleeve shorter, just so I can fit it in the screen to show you. So this is going to be an example of shortening the sleeve. And because that pattern piece is in the way, I like to just trace it out at the bottom line at first, and then use that new drawn line to draw a new line. So I'm going 1 inch up on this sleeve example. And now I'm aligning my center line one more time and keeping that width on the bottom hem of the sleeve, marking that out. And now I'll connect my underarm point to the wrist.
I'll show you really quick that alternatively, this is how I would lengthen the sleeve. Everything's the same, but I'm just dropping it down. All right, now let's look at our pants. All very similar principles, but we have some slight differences. So we're going to trace out the top portion of our pants pattern, and I usually carry that line probably around somewhere around the knee area. Now I'm going to be shortening these pants just so I can fit it on screen. There's not much room here for me to lengthen them and still fit it on my camera. So I'm going to be shortening these hypothetical pants. So I'm going to actually, like I did before, I'm tracing out that bottom line of the pants pattern, and I added a notch so that when I move my pattern up, I can still line it up with something. So you can barely see on the edge of my screen there. I didn't realize how close I was cutting it. I have a little notch at the bottom, and I'm drawing a straight line up from it to make sure that when I drag my pants pattern up my 1 inch, I can line it up and ensure that everything is pretty well centered with the original drawing. Now I'm just going to mark where the width of my pants should be and connect from my knee point down to my ankle point. This is pretty easy when you're making it shorter because you can pretty much just follow the curves that you already have on your sewing pattern. And there you go. Now you have a shorter pants pattern. For a pattern that has segments, like a tiered skirt, for example, you'll want to distribute the total adjustment for that region evenly between the different tiers. So like if the calculator says you need to add 1.5 inches total to the skirt and your skirt has 3 tiers, you'll add 1/2 inch to each tier. All right, that's how to do it. Now, for those of you who are into the more mathy details, here's a little bit of the breakdown explanation. You'll notice that the length of alteration isn't the same for each pattern piece. And you might be wondering why the calculator breaks down the adjustment for each pattern piece instead of applying just like one single measurement change at just one point. Like on a dress, why don't we just add it to the skirt? Well, the reason is that different parts of your body are proportionally different lengths. So if you think of the sleeve, just because you are 3 inches shorter than the average, 64 inches, it doesn't mean your arm is also 3 inches shorter. So to do this calculation, I determined the average ratio of an arm to the total body height. And then I used this number to apply the 3-inch height difference to a more proportionally weighted arm length. If you were to add the same length to both the bodice and the skirt or pants, you could end up with an awkward fit where the waistline doesn't sit at the right spot because our torso isn't generally 50% of our body. So it's not going to be the same as our legs. Breaking it up like this really ensures that your garment maintains more proper proportions and fits your body accurately. And you might even notice that the adjustments don't fully add up to the total body height difference. So like someone who is 61 inches is technically 3 inches shorter than our 64-inch standard. But when we add up the bodice piece and the long skirt adjustments, it only equals 2.35, not 3. Now this is because we don't actually factor in the head or the neck height differences when we're making these adjustments. Focusing instead totally on just the torso and limbs. So it's kind of hard to explain, but ultimately by weighting the differences and adjusting each piece separately, we can ensure a much better fit than like a one-size-fits-all adjustment approach. One final tip that I want to leave you with is to always double check your measurements before you make any cuts in your fabric, and if possible, do test your adjustments on a muslin or scrap fabric or an old bed sheet before cutting into your final fabric. This will really help ensure that the adjustments are more accurate and you can save your good fabric from any potential mistakes. So that's it for today's tutorial. I hope you found it helpful and that you feel super confident making height adjustments to your sewing patterns. Have fun giving this a shot on any of the Charlie Darwin sewing patterns. I've got a new one coming out soon called the Gypsy Moth. It's a boho long 3-tiered dress with a V-neck and lots of ties that add really fun extra texture. This pattern will be out very soon. Go ahead and join my email list to be the first notified when this new pattern comes out, or check out any of the other patterns currently listed on my website, like the swallowtail pants, the pocket, and the canary pattern. If you are going to use the calculator for someone else's sewing patterns, which I totally welcome you to do, then you should definitely check first with that pattern maker to see what height their patterns are originally made for. If you have any questions at all or need some further assistance on this, please feel free to leave a comment below or shoot me an email. And don't forget to visit charliedarwintextiles.com/calculator to use my height adjustment calculator. Happy sewing. See you in the next one. Bye.